Hello.
Hey.
I was just telling people that we're going to talk about speech and language pathology and how it relates to neurodiversity. Specifically, I work with individuals who have FASD. But so you are a school-based speech language pathologist. Can you explain kind of like we think about speech in the context of how you say words, like if a
hmm
child has a lisp or something like, and then a period in. So can you explain more of the breadth of what SLP is?
Definitely. So, yeah, speech and language is what we do, but it definitely involves a lot. So, speech and language can involve like cognition or like anything that has to do with higher level thinking. Language is like receptive and expressive, how you express yourself, how you say that you like things you need, things that you want, how you get your message across, and then how you understand other people's messages. So that's receptive language, being able to answer questions. There's also like social language, pragmatics, which is like the way that we interact with people, how we communicate with friends, and how we understand the way that we communicate in different social settings. And then speech is like articulation. So that would be like sounds and the way that we communicate if we can be understood, like the words that we're saying can be understood. There's like stuttering, which is speech, and then there's phonological processes, which is similar to articulation. It's about the way that we pronounce our sounds. And sometimes there's like kind of like a pattern in the way that we like mispronounce things. So that would be like phonological processes. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of different things like memory, um, figurative language, reading, writing, it's all connected.
So basically everything that you just described is something that would help the broad spectrum of what FASD is. So FASD is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So it's a spectrum like autism and that everybody's symptoms are different. But what you're talking about with receptive and expressive language skills, oftentimes our kids have very high expressive language skills. And so people assume that their receptive language skills are really great, but not necessarily the case. And so social skills usually are challenging. So their chronological and their developmental age don't match and they don't necessarily know what to do. I was just talking to a friend about how like a typical child will read a social situation and be like, oh, so this happened. So maybe next time I should do this. And we don't have that happening. So we have to like literally like textbook teach these sort of things so that they have those skills in different social situations. It's kind of a misnomer that FASD is like super not common, right? It affects 5% of the population. And so a lot of times when I'm talking to professionals, speech therapists, whoever, they're like, I've never had a kid with FASD. I'm like,
Mhm.
but you have, right? Because it's
Yep.
just like statistically impossible. But it's so rarely diagnosed and it's got that stigma piece behind it. We kind of assume it's the disability of parents who are alcoholics, which is absolutely not the case. They're finding very early exposure to alcohol in pregnancy, even in very small amounts, can cause because the central nervous system starts developing so early. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
very
Uh,
early, very
so
early.
it's such a if you don't have a planned pregnancy where you're absolutely abstaining, like the risk is there. And so we want to be able to talk about that more, but also since I work with so many parents and professionals who work with individuals with FASD, I want them to look at speech and see that as a resource for them because I feel like it covers so much of what they do. So you
Definitely.
work at an elementary level. So you're like, I know it's not technically early intervention, but for many of our kids, it really is early intervention because
Oh
that's
yeah,
like,
no,
yeah.
definitely. And then so I work with like individuals from 3 years old, so that would be considered early intervention still. And I do have some kids in my case so that have actually been diagnosed with FASD. Right. I understand that like even before now, I like you said, it's impossible for me to not have had any students with that before. It's definitely spread across like way more than we are aware of. And we do a lot of like the social things. So like you were saying, it's very similar in some ways to autism. So a lot of times we do a lot of similar treatment. Like we do like the social story. So like you said, it's kind of like teaching them like textbook. This is how you'd act in this situation. And maybe if this didn't work, this is how we can do it in another situation. Really just giving them that information that you would like expect them to kind of know, things that we like grow up and just kind of understand. Sometimes like we're kind of like the bridge in helping them like understand those things that they might not get naturally like everybody else. Um, so there's just a lot of things that we do in that way with the social thinking. Um, They have a lot of things with like attention too, and like being able to attend to a task. Sometimes we do see like the speech, like with the articulation and just like making sure that they're getting all those sounds in. Sometimes they have like different size tongues, or like different a makeup of their like jaw structure. So we'll kind of help with that as well. But there's definitely, yeah, there's a lot that we can do with it. And I've learned a lot recently, just like I said, from having them on my caseload. So I feel like a lot of their treatments are so similar to things that we do typically, that speech pathologists should definitely be more aware of FASD, and just like it's going to come up on our caseloads. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is it's so nuanced and how it presents that sometimes kids can be and it's a dynamic disability, and the capabilities can change day to day so much.
Yeah.
And so it can look like kids are being very willful in their social skills, like, oh, well, they know that it's wrong to do whatever, but like not today. Or they may have been performing previously, and so like our kids mask also, and so they may have been performing at a certain point, but they don't know like what the expectation is. And so it's
Yeah.
different to sit a kid down and be like, this is kind of how it works, and explaining those. I find it fascinating to think of the human experience in a more clinical way like that, because it's not something that I've ever theoretically, like, I'm kind of good at picking up stuff, I guess. um, Whatever
Right.
neurotypical is, right? But when I've heard speech therapists giving therapy to my kids, like, I'm like, that's so awesome that we're breaking that down for them, right? And we're
Right.
giving them
And
that kind of that
yeah.
window.
That's
I
really
love
what it
that.
comes down to. Yeah, I feel like a lot of my job is really just like teaching kids things that we expect them to know. Like a lot of my kind of issue is like I feel like we expect kids to know things without ever giving them that information. Like we expect them to just absorb it, and I feel like my job is just to literally feed it to them, and I see it like making a world of difference. And I also wanted to touch on something you said about their expressive language.
Hmm.
Kids with FASD, like they can talk and they can hold a conversation, and like you would think, oh, there's nothing wrong here, like everything is
Hmm.
perfect. And like you said, they're kind of good at like putting that mask on and making it seem like they understand, because they can speak very well and they can make things connect. But a lot of times what I notice is sometimes there's kind of like fluff is a good word. Like there's a lot of fluff in their expressive
Mm.
language.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know that.
Right. So it's like it kind of makes sense. It may or may not make sense, but it's like you didn't really need to say that to get your point across. So a lot of times like speech therapy will be like kind of cutting down the fluff and making it more succinct. And then there's a lot of work with the receptive language, because like I said, they can kind of cover up that they didn't really understand what the question was, or like what you're trying to get across. So working on that receptive language piece is a big one. Um, and yeah, I think with the receptive language, it's a lot of just like I said, like breaking things down and like really going down to the basic of a who question means you're asking about a person, a what question means you're asking about a thing, a why question means they're trying to figure out like this is the way something happens, and they're trying to understand like how it got to that point. Just really breaking down what each question means. And like I said, they do fine with that expressively. So really just getting them to understand the question
And
beforehand.
those are things I would never, as a parent, I would never think of that. So then we theoretically, we see that our kid needs this extra assistance, and hopefully we're not recognizing it as just how they pronounce words, but this much more complex. I mean, it's just like mind boggling. So we recognize that we're going to advocate for an IEP goal. So you're going to need to do an assessment on them to decide whether the data supports the fact that they need a goal. Are there
Mm-hmm.
certain assessments that would be better at finding these more nuanced ideas versus like, so yeah, I sat down with the kid and talked to him for 30 minutes and they can say everything fine, and then we're still missing all this stuff behind. So is there something parents should ask for specifically?
Definitely. If I'm a parent, I would always ask if assessments are dynamic. So that means that a lot of standardized assessments don't account for neurodiversity or racial diversity or cultural diversity. So standardized assessments are very like only tested on this certain like specific population. And if there are other populations, it's a minuscule amount. So it's really not like representative. So I say assessment should always be dynamic, meaning that they should always do standardized assessments. Like everybody should do standardized assessments, but they should do other things as well. So like for me, for speech, I always do a language sample. So that means I'm recording like a conversation or them in like a natural environment so that I can go back and listen to it and really break it down and kind of see like, was there any fluff or did they really understand what this person was asking? Just being able to go back and see like the semantics, how they put their sentences and words together, being able to analyze the language sample. Then you always want to do like an observation, see them in natural environments, take notes from that. I'd also do like kind of like if it's a child, I like to do like a play-based assessment. So really just like getting into like a play environment with them and like seeing if they can like take turns and seeing if they can like interact socially and like whatever like the social limitations might be. So just making sure that it's dynamic. You're not just using standardized assessment, and then like assessment reports should never just be like, this is their score, this is what this means, blah, blah, blah. It should be a narrative. So like, this is what they can do. These are their strengths. This is how it's going to benefit them in the classroom or at home or with their family. And these are some areas of weakness or areas of growth, and how basically how we can make this growth happen. What I can do, what you can do at home. I always provide like, suggestions or activities or anything that they can do. I provide like a list of like 10 things that they can do at home to help carry over, even if they like never get therapy. Like parents, this is something you can do to help with whatever the areas of growth are. So just making sure that your assessments are always comprehensive. I don't have like a specific standardized assessment that I use. I like to use for like everything, but I like to use the SELF. I feel like it's pretty comprehensive, the SELF 5. It goes through like all the language domains. And then, like I said, like my assessments are always dynamic. So I'll do the SELF, and then I'll do the language sample and observation. I always get background history from like teacher, parents, just like making sure that everything is analyzed, not just like the standardized score, because like I said, they're biased and they don't take everything into consideration. But they are useful. They should always be used, but it should be used.
It's more complex than
exactly. Definitely way more complex.
So that was super helpful for me. So I haven't had to negotiate super hard, but I'm advising people to seek out the service. And so I wanted to give them tools. So that's really helpful for you to say all of those things, especially the narrative piece. Our SLP was always the biggest chunk of the ETR, the IEP, the reports that we get, because it was a narrative. It was telling us, but it was so helpful because we'd be like, they observe the kid for this many minutes and notice this many times they'd interrupt. And I'm like, that's helpful to know.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
So I really appreciate that. And these are skills like long term. Of course, I need my kids to be able to read at like a level that would allow them to function in the world. I need them to be able to do math, mostly from a money perspective, but I need them to have social skills that allow them to operate in the world, understand what is happening, what kind of is expected of them. I mean, our kids with FASD crave connection so much, and that barrier of a speech skill oftentimes cuts them away from that, and it's sad. So I really like this goal for that reason. I know it will carry forward, I mean, like forever. The first time I had a kid come home and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have changed the topic like that," I was like,
who
are you?
Right, that would be a huge thing for me to hear with one of my kids.
And I told her too. I told the speech therapist, I was like, this happened at home. This is so crazy. Because the carryover happened, right? Like we learned it at school and we did it somewhere else. It's like incredible. So I love speech. So, okay, that's great. So, and then I can tell that you're a great SLP just by the information that you put out, how you're talking about it right now. Like you love your job and you do a good job at serving the kids that you work with.
Thank you.
You also provide some online content as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what you have available for people?
Yes, definitely. So I'm really big on representation. So I try to make diverse materials that like reflect the world that we live in. So I make online materials like boom cards or just like things that you can download and use in therapy or use at home. And then I also sell like kind of like pamphlets. Like I have one that's like how to talk to kids about race, or like how to show kids that they matter in the class, in like a classroom setting, those kind of things. And then I sell just like apparel, stickers, like random things like that. One more thing I did want to touch on is that when it comes to autism or FASD or anything like that, like a SLP's goal is never to make someone like normal or like make them
Hmm.
like more neurotypical or like anything like that. Like that is not my goal. My goal is just like communication. Like if you can get your point across, if you can go from point A of communication to point B and everybody understands and it was socially appropriate, and like I don't do anything of like trying to change a person or like trying to
Yeah.
change like their social behavior. I just want them to be successful socially. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you have to be like neurotypical to do that. So that's something I want to make clear.
Yeah, no, I think that is a great point because it's complicated in how do we give our kids the tools that they want to be able to have in a situation without like taking away like who they are, right?
Exactly.
Like it is very nuanced. And you know, like oftentimes I'll find when we have like, so because I'm working primarily with older kids, the speech goal is like we agree that this is what we're working on, right? Like it's not like I'm going to tell you I'm going to give you this skill and you're like I hate that skill, I don't want to have that skill, right?
Exactly.
We all have to kind of agree that this is something that we want to get because otherwise we're not going to see success. And so for sure, yes, we are giving tools and not taking away from who they are because they're lovely. Sometimes that means changing the social environment to people who are kinder because we don't
Exactly.
always get that too.
Exactly. But yes, definitely check out my Instagram is here, JRC the SLP, and then
Great
I
content.
have thank you. And then my website, it has everything that I do for like therapy and treatment, and then also everything I sell is jrctheslp.com.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that the parents, I'm hoping some speech therapists came on here also and learned something about FASD, but I know the parents that I work with are going to be like, this is amazing content for us to refer back to. So thank
Yeah,
you so much for
hopefully.
joining us, and I appreciate it. We'll keep in touch.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right.
We'll talk to
Bye.
you soon.